Sabersim swap tools allow you to quickly and accurately and efficiently swap your lineups when big news breaks after the slate has already locked. You can find these swap tools in our entry editor. For this video, I'm going to be focusing specifically on the swap tools here, but if you have questions about the way the entry editor works, I recommend checking out some of our other tutorials. The swap button in the upper right is how you get started with the swap tools, and when you click this, you'll see that there are two options, quick swap and late swap. Let's talk about quick swap first. You can think about this tool as the global swap tools that you see on FanDuel and DraftKings on steroids. What this is going to do is it's going to look through your lineups, looking for all players that are currently marked as out, and replace them with the best available player while using as much salary as available for that particular spot in the lineup. This tool can be very powerful when you don't have a lot of time and need to adjust quickly and make sure that none of your lineups end up with a player with a big fat 0 in them by the end of the night. By default, again, you'll see it says replace all out players with best available, and when we click apply and download, it's going to scan all of the lineups and give you a new entries file that's ready to be uploaded that makes the changes. In this case, I'm recording this when there is not actually an active slate. There are no out players, so we don't see any results come up here. However, we can also swap out a specific player, which can sometimes be useful if there's news that breaks about a player, but doesn't necessarily mean that player is out. Let's just say, hypothetically, that on tonight's slate, Donovan Mitchell, there's news that comes out that says that he's going to play limited minutes. And we decide that we want to react quickly to this, and what we're just going to do is swap out Donovan Mitchell. We can go in here, type in Donovan Mitchell's name, click Donovan Mitchell, all lineups, and say that we want to swap with the best available player. If we wanted to swap with a specific player, that would be another option here, but in this case, we'll just use the best available. In this case, now you can see Donovan Mitchell has been removed from 8 of our lineups, and he's been replaced with Fred VanVleet or Josh Giddey, depending on how much salary is available and what position Donovan Mitchell was originally used in that lineup. The quick swap tool is a really powerful tool to quickly get players that are out, or specific players out of your lineups. But if you've been playing DFS for a little while, you know that when news like this breaks, a lot of times it has an impact on other players playing in the game. And actually what we want to do is rebuild the rest of the lineup to maybe get some exposure to some of the new value plays that are now available. And that's why we built the late swap tool. So if we go back to the swap button here and click late swap, you'll see a very familiar build settings table here that allows you the opportunity to rebuild your lineups while also messing with any of the original settings that were used to build those lineups in the first place. You can go in here, tweak or update sliders, update any of your build settings, or set or remove old or different rules that you use to build your lineups. And then what we'll do when you click this button here, this late swap 22 lineups, in this case I have 22 lineups, we're going to lock in the players into your lineups whose games have already started, exclude the players that are not in your lineups whose games have already started, and rebuild the best possible lineup in the remaining slots that are available in that particular lineup. What this means is that you'll be reacting to news and updating your lineups with the new projections while also taking into account our simulations, ownership fade, and correlation, all the wonderful things that make your lineups that you've built with Sabersim so great in the first place. Once your lineup build is complete for your late swap build, you can just simply download this new entries file up here in the top right. Because the late swap tool lives in the entry editor and we already have your entries file, you don't need to go back to the entry editor to download or fill this again. You can just click the download new entries file and this will download a new file for you immediately. For now though, let's hop back over to the entry editor and I want to talk about a couple other things about this particular tool. First off, when you late swap, we are only going to be rebuilding the exact number of lineups that you actually have here. What that means is that in a normal build, if you need 20 lineups, for example, we're going to build you a pool of 500 and allow you to adjust exposures after the build to dial everything to get it where you want it to be. When you're late swapping, it's not going to be able to work that way. You need to set your min or maximum exposures before the build here so that we know exactly what kind of exposures you want us to meet when we build those lineups. If, for example, we wanted to bring down our exposure to Michael Bridges when we ran the late swap, we can set a maximum exposure to him of 50% here, and then we'll honor that exposure when we run the late swap build. Of course, most people aren't really interested in late swapping their cash lineup directly alongside their GPP lineups and their satellite lineups, so you can use the same filter tool that we saw in the entry editor tutorial here to filter by just a particular lineup type and late swap only that lineup type with its specific settings. When we run this, we'll late swap only my cash build, and again, I can go in and use the download new entries button here in the upper right to get my new cash build. The last thing I'll note here on the entry editor is this upload new entries button. There are going to be times where maybe your lineup file in Sabersim has somehow gotten out of sync, or if you've made changes to your lineups directly on either of the site that we don't know about in the app here, you may run a late swap build and end up with an error upon uploading that entries file to the site that says the late swap is invalid. If that happens, the best thing I can recommend here is to use the upload new entries file and download a fresh template file from the sites, re-upload it, and then try your late swap. That's going to sync Sabersim and the lineups that you have on the site back up, and it should make the late swap proceed with success. The last thing I'll note is when you're late swapping these lineups on Sabersim, there can be situations where you may have a particular rule in place that's preventing a lineup from getting late swapped. A very common example is if there is a single last game on the night and a high projected, high salary player gets ruled out, someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo or Nikola Jokic getting ruled out from their team at the last game of the night, it can put a lot of pressure on the builder to find a new lineup or a new player to use in that slot without breaking any of the rules you've set. If you run a late swap build and you're getting a message that says we cannot rebuild some of your lineups, what I recommend doing is in the build settings, making a few changes. First, drop your min salary down significantly or even to 0. This will mean that the builder can use a lower salary player to replace the high salary player that got ruled out of your lineups. Second, if you set min uniques above the default of 1, turn it back down to 1. It's likely that you already got the value of your min uniques out of most of your lineups, but if we're trying to do one final late swap before the final game of the night, you may need to turn this back down to 1 to get that done. Finally, if you have any stacking or groups or other rules set in the build settings, remove them if you're running into late swap issues. There can be situations where a no more than X players from Y team rule or otherwise a just different stacking rule or groups rule can cause some problems when trying to do a late swap with just a single game left on the slate. I recommend removing those if you're running into trouble. However, the late swap tools on Sabersim overall are an extremely powerful way to rebuild and update your lineups when impactful news comes out. If you have any other questions, as always, feel free to reach out in the Runpuresports Discord or check out some of our other tutorials. Until then, thanks and good luck.